Returning 0% of your team's production from last year sounds like a nightmare, but it might just be a blessing in disguise for Baylor.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, joined today by Locked On Baylor host Cam Stuart. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you that you can check out the show ad-free on Amazon Music. Thrilled to have you on today, Cam. Looking forward to a conversation here about the Baylor Bears as they're playing in a tournament. The World University Games right now just finished up their first 3 games, so we got a good look at this Baylor roster together, which is good because this Baylor roster has not played minutes together. It was an incredibly unique offseason for the Bears. They lost literally every player from their roster, but while that was kind of a popular narrative early in the offseason as people were, as they have done the last few years, kind of panicking about, oh, look at these teams, they're losing everybody and there's no continuity. And like, I understand watching 30 games of a team and then the next year there is none of those same players. That's certainly not ideal. But this was also, quite honestly, a Baylor team that disappointed last year. They were not as good as expected. And, they had some great players. Obviously, VJ Edgecombe was fantastic. Rob Wright is a guy I imagine most fans would have liked to have back in Waco for this upcoming season. But what are your kind of thoughts now that the dust has settled, now that we have a roster kind of coming off of a disappointing season, about how this offseason has gone for Coach Drew and the Bears?
Yeah, I'm excited, I guess is the way to put it. Because it was a tough offseason, and it was kind of, you said unique. It really is. I would say bizarre, because you had a situation where, the whole team leaves, and that doesn't happen when a coach is staying. You know what I mean? That usually happens when a coach is fired. And so typically in just the world of college basketball, if that happens for a coach that stays, you're thinking, okay, what's wrong with the coach? Not at Baylor, obviously. And it was kind of a perfect storm of, underachievement and guys not getting the roles and kind of where we are in college basketball in 2025, that maybe I'm just being naive and looking at it through the Baylor colored glasses, but it seemed like a perfect storm of like, yeah, this wasn't really Scott Drew's fault. It just kind of happened this way. And we talk a big game as fans. I did it certainly with Baylor football a few years ago of like, we don't want anyone to come back. This season stunk. Like we don't want anybody to come back. Well, now here's the experiment. Now here it is. It was a disappointing season last year. We found that out pretty early on. Not necessarily night one against the Zags, which was very disappointing, but it wasn't that long after that we were like, okay, this team just isn't as good as we expected it to be. And it was really frustrating throughout the whole season. They didn't really drop out of the tournament picture, but in no way did they look good enough to be a Sweet 16 team, let alone an Elite 8 Final Four team, which is what we thought we had going into the season, ambitiously, of course. But it's now you're going to see what it's like to see Scott Drew flip an entire roster in an offseason. And if there's a coach out there that I would trust to do that, it is Scott Drew. And I think he did a good job putting it together, all told. I know Jeff Goodman still put them as one of the big losers of the offseason. And it just didn't feel like that in Waco, probably because of what we're just talking about. Like, it was a disappointing season. We're frustrated every week watching this team. And so it would have been kind of two-faced to then be like, oh, well, then they didn't keep anybody. Like, this is terrible. It's exciting to see what he's put together here, obviously with a 5-star freshman in Tounde Yessofou, and then a bunch of guys from the portal, a little bit of a mixture of the old Scott Drew, of like those mid-major guys who are about to take the next step, and a little bit of that new Scott Drew of, even a Big 12 guy in here, some Power 4 starters who are ready to take on even bigger roles at Baylor. So a long way of saying, Andy, I'm really excited to see how this team comes together out of the ashes of what came through in March.
Yeah, it's funny. You kind of mentioned the double punishment, which is what I have found so odd too, is people say Baylor was bad last year and they lost everybody. Therefore, like both of those things are bad. And I'm like, well, no, that doesn't, I don't really think it can work that way. Like if you didn't think the team was good, then you should, in theory, kind of be able to judge them based on a completely new roster, and like not having them as a big loser, or not having them, in the top 25, I think is justifiable. But like John Rothstein has them 45th. And I'm like, if you just blind look at this roster without factoring in anything else, it's a top 40 roster for sure, maybe a top 30 roster. And then you factor in Scott Drew and his reputation as a coach. Like, I can't imagine having this team outside of like the top 40 range, knowing, that obviously, yes, the lack of continuity is a factor, and you should evaluate that of like, hey, these guys have not played together, but they're getting that experience, which we are going to talk about. And the high-end talent coming onto this program is excellent. You mentioned Yessoufou. I mean, what an incredible player to come into this program, in what has now been 4 years in a row of having like high profile freshman guards coming in with George and with Walter, and then of course VJ. What are you kind of expecting to see out of Yessoufou? And then I do want to talk about some of the transfers too, but let's start with him and what he could bring to this team.
Yeah, man. I mean, he brings a little bit of everything, Andy. Kind of like what VJ Edgecombe did last year. Again, I know that probably irks some Baylor fans because they're like, well, we loved VJ, but he didn't elevate the team. Tounde Yessofou comes in with all kinds of explosiveness. The comp he draws now is Anthony Edwards. And I'm not saying he's going to be the number one pick in the draft, all NBA kind of player, but you watch him play and you're like, is this an Anthony Edwards high school mixtape? Like, it's very similar. And he obviously models his game after him too. The explosiveness, the size, the way they play. I think you do see something very similar to VJ Edgecombe. He's not going to be a knockdown shooter. He's not going to be this creative pass first kind of guard. He's going to be a little bit of in between. He's going to be a cutter, a slasher with a ton of explosiveness who can rebound and hopefully, like VJ did, guard a couple of different positions. And I think where it comes in the context of this Baylor team is it's a starting point. Right? Like throughout the best thing about the offseason is they didn't lose Tounde Yessofou amazingly, like with all that was going on. And he is a starting point for what this Baylor team can be. And it kind of all branches out from him, even though he's probably not going to be the best player on the roster this year, maybe not even the most impactful. He'll be the best prospect, obviously, but it will branch out from him. And looking at this team kind of in general, and Scott Drew, going back to the Rothstein thing, like, this is the fourth time in 5 years that Baylor's had to replace at least 4 of their 5 starters. And Scott Drew, and that's a lot. Like that's no bueno, right? And Scott Drew's done that each time. And at no point in those years did you say they were worse than the 40th best team in the country. Not even last year, which was a struggle. At no point were they that. So I don't think they're that this year. I don't think they're a Final Four team. I think they're probably scratching and clawing in the tournament like they did this year. But Tounde Yessofou is the starting point, the foundation for this team. He's going to be able to do hopefully a little bit of just about everything for you.
I think part of it too, in terms of kind of how this team is being perceived, is that a lot of the players they brought in are, like you said, a lot of them are mid-major guys, which there's a subset of people who just are much more hesitant to assume that mid-major guys will elevate when they come to this level. And oftentimes they do. And typically coaches who are very good at identifying those players, their hit rate is really high. And Scott Drew, certainly, I mean, I don't know how many people were hesitant on like Ray J. Dennis, but look what he did when he comes in. Like, you have these guys fairly regularly. And so to me, like, seeing that, you got some at least one high major transfer in Dan Skillings, but you got the guy that I really want to talk about. And since we're going to talk about the World University Games, we might as well start by talking about the guys who were not in the World University Games. And one of them was Yessoufou, and the other one, big one, was Mikey Rataj. Mikey Rataj is German, so he actually played for Team Germany in this event. And he comes from Oregon State. And I watched him a lot. I watched him live in person. I spoke to him at the WCC Media Days last year. He is a tremendously talented player. And anybody who is not aware of him or is maybe downgrading what they think he's capable of doing, I would not be surprised at all if he is an all Big 12 first team caliber guy. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being drafted in the NBA draft at the end of the season. He's a 6'8" forward. He can play the 4. He can play the 3. He's a very good outside shooter. He hung 30 on Gonzaga in Oregon State's upset win in Corvallis. He's going to be excellent. And he really, to me, fits a lot of what Scott Drew likes to do. And when I saw that's where he was going, I was like, man, that's a match made in heaven right there.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously seen him a little bit more than I did out here in the Central Time Zone.
Sure.
But certainly you looked at the numbers right away and you were like, this is a steal here. This is someone that, again, like you kind of mentioned, people are going to poo-poo because, he didn't play a high major schedule. But, when he was called upon, like against Gonzaga, he really showed up. He reminds me a lot of Jalen Bridges. The pure shooting ability, it's probably not quite there, but he is a good 3-point shooter. Like he's a 35% 3-point shooter, which is what you'll take. And I think he's going to have to play a bigger role, like literally, for Baylor this year. I think he's going to be more, they don't have a true power forward. I don't think they've got guys at power forward size who are probably going to have to play center. So I'm interested to see kind of what his role is specifically at the defensive end for Baylor. But yeah, he brings in a lot of the things that Scott Drew loves, kind of this positionless kind of basketball, which is such an overused phrase at this point. But Michael Rataj definitely brings that. He's a guy who averaged double figures quite easily, basically a double-double, or pretty close to a double-double last year at Oregon State. I think he's probably, Andy, the most talented transfer they brought in. Obi Agbem from Wyoming, I'm very high on as a conference player of the year, but you want to talk about the combination of basically a Power 4 program and what the numbers that he was able to put up. Michael Rataj is someone that is going to be appearing on a lot of lists, maybe not preseason, but certainly midseason and postseason. And you're calling him all Big 12 first team. I'm in, Andy. Okay, I'm sold. And he's also done pretty well for Team Germany at this event too. So not for nothing.
Well, folks, Baylor may have a new look roster, but the team is gaining valuable time together, like we talked about, playing in Germany right now. We're going to talk about what that looks like, what that might mean for Scott Drew and the Bears heading into the season, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever decided at the last minute to head out to a ball game with your friends or your family? Maybe it's game day. You decide, you know what? I'd rather be in the stands. I don't want to watch this one on TV. And that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without all the extra stress and hassle. And with the money that you can save on tickets, you can splurge on foods, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group of friends to come out with you to the park. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game. Speaking of which, the Atlanta Braves coming to Arlington to take on the Rangers this weekend on Friday. Game Time has a zone deal where tickets are just $28 a piece, and that includes fees. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. You can get that ticket for $8. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Cam, continuing our conversation here about this very new look Baylor Bears roster heading into the upcoming season. We talked a little bit about Yessoufou, the incoming freshman, and about Mikey Rataj, one of their incoming transfers. Both those guys not participating for this Baylor Team USA team that is participating in the World University Games, in Germany. This is a cool event going on where Baylor's roster effectively gets to participate against other countries. So far, they've played India, Latvia, and Romania. Earlier today, as we're recording on Monday the 21st, they got 3 more games coming up in a few days as well. So this is pretty cool, exciting opportunity. The entire roster is Baylor players except one guy who I think is from Yale. They are not playing with Rataj, with Yessoufou, and then one of their other transfers, Bodo, is not participating as well. But for the most part, Cam, you're looking at this Baylor roster getting an opportunity to gel, getting an opportunity to be coached by Coach Drew, compete against not just themselves in scrimmages, but actually compete against other teams and other players. And we said this right before we hit the record button, I can't imagine a team more equipped to take on this opportunity than a Baylor team that did not have any continuity coming into the season. What a great chance for this team to kind of get to know each other before the season begins.
Absolutely. Like, I had this image in my head that Scott Drew was banging on somebody's door, somebody's window,
Right.
being like, "Can it be us, please, please, please?" I remember a similar event a couple years ago in Canada, where it was the first time we got to see Keontae George, and so it was a huge deal. And this doesn't necessarily have the fanfare to it, but like you say, man, like, if there's anybody that needs to be playing somebody else right now, it's Baylor. And I know there's the three guys that aren't there could well all be starters, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. You'd want your starters to be out there, but there's also room for more development for these guys that are going to be coming off the bench. And obviously Rataj is playing, like you said, but for Germany, not for Team USA. But I'm intrigued by this, not because, like, obviously the competition isn't what it's going to be in the Big 12. But just watching this is like, it's an absolute hack job. Okay. Yeah. It is super physical. And obviously you're starting to see a lot more of that in the European game. It's very, very physical, and that is going to get you ready for the Big 12. And so it's almost like Scott Drew saying, licking his chops, saying, like, let's run these guys through the gauntlet. Let's play 10 or 12 guys in the game, see what we've got here, see how they're gelling, and not necessarily get the talent or the atmosphere that you're going to get in the Big 12, but the physicality. That's something you cannot replicate even in practice. You can put on your pads and bang the guys as they're going in for layups, but nothing actually prepares you for that, except maybe something like this. So it's an absolute blessing that Baylor's able to play in this tournament and has done well in it.
Well, we want to talk about a few of the guys who've stood out. Like you said, I mean, the team's 3-0 at this point, and the competition level, I mean, I think they beat one of the teams by 60 or so, but they did have a closer game against Latvia. So they're getting at least adequate competition. Like you said, it's more about the team gelling and getting used to some of that physicality. But we've seen a few guys really stand out, and guys that I would have probably expected. Like, if I'd seen this roster and you said who's going to be their leading scorers, I probably would have guessed Obi Agbim and Dan Skillings, and those have been two of the best players that have played for this team. Of course, Agbim coming over from Wyoming, he was outstanding, one of the best players in the Mountain West, and then Skillings coming over from Cincinnati, that Big 12 to Big 12 transfer. Another guy who stood out to me, at least, is Cameron Carr, who's looked very good in these few games as well. For you, is there anybody in particular that maybe you weren't expecting to play well, or even just the guys who have played well that you're even more excited about this upcoming season for them?
Yeah, definitely Cam Carr stood out. I talked about him on my show earlier in the week of just, you see the tape, right? Like, he's 6'6" and everything. And you see him out there, you're like, my God, like, he's got this huge wingspan. He's blocking shots. He's blocking jump shots. He's averaging like 4 or 5 steals a game in this tournament. He's become a menace to the point where I'm like, does this role change for Cam Carr? I'm beginning to apologize or write out an apology for Dan Skillings. I was not high on Dan Skillings coming into this, a guy who kind of lost his job, so to speak, at Cincinnati this year. But he's started in the Big 12 before, so that's worth something. He's been electric in this. He's been a scorer in this tournament, which he wasn't exactly for Cincinnati last year, or at least those numbers dipped. Isaac Williams from A&M Corpus, like, out of nowhere. I don't know what his role is exactly going to be on this team. It's pretty guard heavy. I feel like he's down the depth chart, but the guy's been lighting it up in this tournament. It's not 12, 15 points a game, but all of his buckets you're seeing on the highlights. He's dunking over guys as a guard. That's a name to look out for because you're kind of looking at this team of plenty of depth, but is it all depth? And there's a big difference as to what that actually means. And Isaac Williams could make for a great depth piece as this team starts to figure out its starting five and its rotation. But that's a guy who I thought was going to be buried on the end of the bench, but he might be earning himself some minutes.
Yeah, you mentioned the starting lineup, and I think that's the perfect kind of transition to look at what that might look like for this team, because I think John Rothstein laid out his projected starting five. It's similar to what I would have thought for this team, and I think you're right that the depth is kind of more of a question for this team, and that's why guys like Cameron Carr and Isaac Williams looking good in this event is really, really compelling for this Baylor team. But the projected starting five for Rothstein at least is Jesslyn Bodo at the 5, Mikey Rataj at the 4, Tounde Yessofou at the 3, and then Skillings and Agbim starting at the 2 backcourt positions. Mm-hmm. That feels right to me. I mean, Cameron Carr again has looked good, but I don't see who he would replace in that starting lineup necessarily. Does that feel about right to you? Is there anything that you think maybe could go a little bit differently this year? Or is that kind of what you're thinking that 5 is going to look like?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking. I've been going back and forth the last couple of days on Cam Carr and Dan Skillings, because I think Skillings, it's kind of one of those classic basketball things of like, oh, do we want that kind of guy coming off the bench, right, and giving us that boost off the bench? Not that he's not starter quality. I think JJ White's a really interesting one. The guard from Nebraska Omaha. Like, he's not a starter. He's not a starter day one, but he could end up being their best 3-point shooter. Yeah. And so, you wonder if there's some matchups throughout the season where if he's playing well and shooting 40%, like, is that a guy you start at some point, or is he just one of your first shooter off the bench? Bodo was the one that I was kind of back and forth on for a while. And I remember seeing that Rothstein projection and saying, okay, this is validating me. Cause I think he's your starting center. Not only is he the tallest guy in the team, but like I mentioned earlier, you got a bunch of tweeners in terms of size. Like Caden Powell was another one. I thought he's gonna play some center at 6'9", but probably not starting for you. Bodo comes off back-to-back defensive player of the year performances in the SoCon. I think he just brings a lot of the good things that you've had from different Baylor bigs over the last couple of years, like Flo Thamba, a terrific individual defender at his peak at Baylor, but not the fleetest of foot. And then you also bring in a kind of a shot blocking ability that Yves Missi had, and Jesslyn Bodo kind of brings the best of both of that. He's more athletic than Flo. He's got that kind of timing that Yves Missi had and has now in the NBA. So I think he could be, Jesslyn Bodo to me has kind of the biggest upside, maybe the biggest positive surprise of this starting lineup. I think this kid can be an all Big 12 defensive performer year one, if it kind of comes together.
Well, we know one thing about Scott Drew. He is not afraid to put together a competitive schedule, even in a season where he's not coming into the year with any continuity of any kind. So we're going to talk about what this schedule looks like for Baylor, both in and out of the Big 12 Conference, make some predictions about how this season might go. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, you ever wish managing your money just felt a little bit easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning for a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's kind of like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility of and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also helping build wealth. I found that I really love having everything in one place. I don't want to have to go to multiple different apps or use a spreadsheet to try to track everything. Just put it all in one spot. It makes managing the day-to-day finances so much easier. So folks, take control of your finances by using Monarch Money. And use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off for your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Well, Cam, Baylor certainly not putting themselves in a position of like, oh, we're not really sure what we have with this roster, so maybe we take a step back on the non-conference schedule, play some easier games, blah, blah, blah. You see a lot of teams do that, and if we're being completely honest, you see a lot of teams in the Big 12 be willing to do that, and Baylor, not one of them. This is a schedule that what we know so far already includes a home-and-home series with Washington, who is another team that is kind of significantly rebuilt after a disappointing year. So I'm excited to see how those games go. You got a 4-year series just agreed to with Memphis, who is not joining the Big 12. That news came out earlier today. Despite their best efforts, Memphis not getting in the Big 12 anytime soon. But you got a 4-year series with them. And then you got this game against Louisville in February. Always fun to see those kind of mid-conference season games against non-con teams. And Louisville, again, another program that's been wildly rebuilt in the last few years under Coach Pat Kelsey. We're assuming there's going to be a game against Gonzaga. It has not been finalized, but they played last year. The expectation was that was going to be a 2 or maybe even a 3-year series. So while we haven't seen a date on that, somebody who follows Gonzaga, they like to be the very last team in all of college basketball to reveal their non-conference schedule. So we just may have to wait a little bit. But assuming you get Gonzaga, Louisville, Memphis, Washington, you also have the 2 games in the Players Era Festival, which as of right now is Creighton and St. John's. And then there'll be a 3rd game there too. This is an incredibly competitive group. Scott Drew's throwing his team right into the fire. Is that something you feel good about knowing this group at this point for the Baylor Bears?
Well, feel good about, I don't know. Surprised though. No, not surprised. And I was kind of thinking earlier in the offseason, like, is this the year that Scott just takes it a little easier?
Mm-hmm.
Like just a little bit. I mean, the answer is probably yes, but it's not easy, right? Like he's not, last year he opened with 2 top 20 matchups. So he's not doing that, but you talk about a Creighton team that's rebuilding a little bit, retooling maybe. I mean, all that team does is just win in March. Like all that team does in the last 5 years. St. John's looking for some revenge after a great double overtime matchup last year. Obviously, Rick Pitino had that team humming by the end of the season. A little bit of a new look there. And it just goes to show that there's almost like this honor in what Scott Drew's doing. He's like, you know what? Like nobody's coming to save us when it comes to the Big 12 schedule. So yeah, I can take it easy here. I could keep lining up the Sam Houstons and the Tarletons and the UTSAs, but it's not going to help us. It's not going to help us getting into the Big 12. This conference is obviously going to be a gauntlet as it always is. So there's going to be some probably tough lessons here, but I'll lean back on last year's experience again, Andy, and that is, you're probably not going to lose by 40 points in game 1. If I had to guess, I don't know who game 1 is yet, but you're probably not going to lose by 40 points. Although if it is the Zags again, who knows? All bets are off. But that is at least a different start from last year. And I guess the jury's still out on whether these are really helping Baylor. Like they had a tough non-con in 2021 when they won it all. But they've also had it the last 4 years when they haven't been able to get out of the first weekend. So we've seen teams compete for the Big 12 championship with a tough non-con, and we saw last year's team barely scraping in. So it's kind of like the jury is still out on whether that really works, really helps you, really gets you into the groove of what the NCAA tournament's going to be like, what the Big 12 schedule is going to be like. But man, no rest for the wicked. Like, just, all right, guys, here we go, back into a Baylor schedule. I think that's a standard that he has set with this program, and clearly he's not willing to back off it.
Looking at the Big 12 schedule too, we don't have the dates or anything, but we do know which teams Baylor's going to play, as they've dropped down from their 20-game schedule back to an 18-game conference slate, which means you play 3 teams twice, and then you play 6 teams at home, 6 teams on the road. For Baylor, the 3 teams that they're getting twice are Houston, Iowa State, and TCU. And Isaac and I had a hell of a time a few weeks ago trying to figure out which Big 12 teams have the toughest versus easiest non-conference or conference schedules, because there's not really any easy schedules in the Big 12, but I got to say, 4 games against Houston and Iowa State is not an easy task. And when you throw in TCU, who's maybe not great, but there's that regional rivalry aspect to it. That's a pretty brutal stretch there for Scott Drew's team. And obviously they don't have to play BYU on the road, which is great. That's a tough place to play. They don't have to play Texas Tech or Arizona on the road, but they do got to play Kansas on the road. They do got to go out to Central Florida, not a great team, but a brutal road trip. They got to go to Morgantown. Like, this is a pretty tough schedule for this team, and kind of coming into this conference after this rebuilt roster, it feels like there's going to be some challenges. How do you feel about this team's chances, knowing that it's really hard to project a roster like this? Kind of, how do you feel about them getting back into that top 5 conversation in the Big 12?
Yeah, I think that would be a real overachievement to get inside the top 5, and certainly, like you say, it's tough to project it out with what this roster is going to be. I like it. Like, I think it is deep. Is it overly talented? Probably not. It's not the most talented roster they've had here in the last couple of years, but it is. You did kind of get the short end of what those what the two matchups are going to be, like the teams you play twice. TCU, you mentioned it's a toughie. They've won in Waco the last 3 years, so that's not a fun kind of a team to have twice. I'd rather just play them on the road. But I just don't see 5 teams that, or excuse me, I don't see a way where they're better than those top 5 or 6 programs, let alone teams, right? Like Houston's going to be up there. Iowa State's going to be up there. Tech could win this whole thing. Arizona's still going to be pretty good. Like, I just think there's such a drop off in quality there from those teams to Baylor. That said, I keep referring back to this, but it's like, they're probably not going to be worse than last year. Even though they had a top 5 NBA pick in VJ Edgecombe, even though they had one of the best players in the entire Big 12 in Norchad Omier, they're probably not going to be as bad a team or worse team than they were last year. And they were sitting in that kind of 8th, 9th place in the Big 12, 8-9 seed and throughout kind of the whole conference schedule. So maybe I'm just being naive. I don't see them dropping to the bottom of this conference. As good as this conference is, I just think there is some low quality teams down at the bottom this year. Looking again at kind of an Oklahoma State, a UCF, who on their day absolutely can beat just about anybody. But I just think Baylor's going to have consistently better talent than those teams. So top 5, probably not. Top 8 or 9, sure. And that gets you in the tournament in this conference still. So yeah, I would be happy with. I would say top 6 would be their best. How about that? I'm not saying top 5, but top 6. I think that would be on the high end. That would be pretty good.
I think that's doable. I mean, I think you nailed the top 4 teams. To me, it's Houston, Texas Tech, Iowa State, Arizona in whatever order, probably pretty close to that order in my mind. And then after that, like, that competition for that 5th spot, BYU obviously bringing in the superstar freshman Dibansa, they're in the mix. Kansas, they've been bad the last couple of years, but
they still play basketball.
Yeah, they still have a basketball team, and they have a basketball team that doesn't have Hunter Dickinson, which might help them going forward. So we'll see what that looks like. They're in the mix. BYU's in the mix, but I think Baylor's in the mix right there too. I think they're in the mix 5, 6, 7. We'll see what Kansas State looks like. I'm not thrilled with where they are. West Virginia's rebuilding. Cincy hasn't been great. Like, I think Baylor can kind of compete in that middle spot. Like you said, the difference between 5, 6, 7, even 8, even potentially 9, you're still probably getting in the dance, especially if you win some of those tough non-con games. So I think that Scott Drew has set this team up well to be in a position to compete, even with such a new look roster. I don't think it was going to happen too many more times to Baylor, but I thought that all things considered, this offseason has gone well, and I'm excited to see what this team can do next year.
Me too. I wouldn't put them as one of the biggest losers.
Yeah.
I'll just say that. I think they bounce back enough that they probably get out of the top 5 losers in my book. Anyway.
I would agree with that 100%. Cam, thank you so much for joining the show. I always appreciate having your insight, expertise into this Baylor team. We'll be back. We got some more fun shows planned for you all this week, folks, but we are also going to start very soon our team and conference preview series. So Cam, we may end up having you back on to talk a little bit more in depth about this Baylor team, but thanks again for joining the show. That's going to wrap it up for us today. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. And until next time, peace out.